So my friend and I were sitting out on these bluffs right outside of our neighborhood 4 years ago and experienced something that I still can't even begin to explain to this day unless I consider the possibility that things like goblins and elves exist. But they can't, right? Those are just fairy tales. I'll try to describe what I saw to you as best as I can. Just so you know, my name is Rachel. I can't tell you my last name. My friend that was with me is named Ryan. He's been my best friend forever. During the time of this encounter, I guess you could call it that, I was going through a rather tough breakup with my boyfriend, and I'd been pretty bitter lately. Ryan is one of those guys that everyone asks why you don't date. Well, it's like this. He's an attractive guy, I guess, but it's a totally platonic relationship. He's been like a brother to me since we were kids. Just to paint the picture for you. So basically, he was taking me out to one of our favorite spots to tell me that I needed to chill out, because I'd been a real bitch lately. Of course, he worded it differently, but you get the point. We talked for a really long time about how negative I'd been. Of course, during our talk, we rolled up a joint so I could take my mind off of everything. And we continued to talk about how negative I'd been since the breakup. I cried a bit, we talked more, I cried more, but I was still just mad. I'd been scorned pretty badly, and I was just pissed off. He got through to me, though, and I started feeling a little better. We even started to laugh, which could have been from the pot, I know, but it still made me a lot better. I just wanted to be like myself again. I didn't want to think about that jerk anymore. I wanted my life back. After a while, we started stargazing, talking about old memories and how bright the stars were that night, and all that good stuff. Basically, just enjoying the high from the pot. I was gazing down this path that you have to take to get up to the spot we were at, and I could have sworn I saw what looked like a little person standing in the dark. I squinted and stared, thinking the shadows were just playing with me. The path takes a pretty sharp turn to the right as the area clears out to where we hang out, but as the path turns, there's a bunch of these shrub brushes and stuff. It's a pretty dark path, unless the moon is big. I didn't say anything at first, because I thought it was just my imagination, but the more I stared, the more solid this thing became. The only way I can actually describe it is that it looked like a shadow at first, almost see-through, but the outline of it started to solidify or something. And then the body, and after a while, it was clear that something or someone was there. It was one of those situations where even though I knew something freaky was going on, I couldn't make words for it. It was like I was in shock, or captivated or something. I just couldn't form the words. But also on the other hand, it was almost like I was in a trance. Like this thing was holding me in place just by its own will. And then my eyes either adjusted to the shadows, or this thing made itself entirely invisible to me. I don't know. But here's what I saw. A small man. No more than 2 feet tall. I mean, he wasn't even taller than the bushes he was by. He was dressed in all black, and had a cloak or something like that on, and his boots were shining in the moonlight. He had human hands, but the fingers were stubby. He was squat, like he should be taller for the width of him. He had this thick, long nose, human eyes, but at this point, I couldn't make much out of them, and the small, pointed ears. His hair was dark. It was short and unkempt. I actually managed to poke Ryan, still unable to talk for some reason, and just pointed to the thing that was standing there. He gazed over and actually choked. He asked what the hell that thing was. We both heard what sounded like a hoarse snicker or something. Like, whatever this thing was excited. And then it slowly started coming at us. But, I shit you not, it wasn't walking or crawling. This thing was gliding. I could see its feet, and they were not moving as this thing came towards us. Its hands were at its sides, but the palms were facing us. I still think to this day he was using his hands to make himself float or levitate or some shit like that. You're probably asking yourself, girl, why didn't you dumbasses just get the hell out of there? Right? Well, let me tell you this. I tried. I tried to get up and run. I tried to get up and defend myself. I tried to get up and just get away from there. But I was frozen. Not like frozen in fear, although, believe me, I was pretty scared at this point. But I was like in a trance, or paralyzed. Like this thing had control over us, and neither of us could move a muscle. I tried my hardest. My brain was registering that I needed to get out of there. My brain was registering that I was trying to move my legs, trying to use my arms to push myself up. But my muscles just wouldn't work. And then this loud buzzing started, like electricity. Only, there's no power lines out there where we were. Ryan later told me he heard the same thing, like the buzzing of powerful electricity. The air was electrified too, like statically charged or something. I could feel my arm hairs rise up and my body tingle. Basically, I was hyperventilating at this point, scared out of my mind. I literally had something out of a horror movie in front of me, and I still couldn't move. It was close enough now to get more detail at this point. Even through the tears that were in my eyes, I could make out everything about this little man. He had this olive complexion, and his eyes were almost pure black, like his pupils were abnormally big. He had these longish fingernails, but not claws. They were fingernails on those short, stubby fingers. He had wrinkles on his face, and was the ugliest thing that I've ever seen. I glanced at Ryan, but only with my eyes, and he looked just as terrified as me. He had tears in his eyes too, and he was as pale as the grave. He looked at me with his eyes too. He looked like he wanted to say something, but I don't think he could. Finally, I managed to half scream, half choke for this thing to get away from us. Honestly, it didn't even sound like it came from me, but I know it did. This thing stopped and actually bared its teeth at us. They were all jacked up and crooked. Some of them even looked sharp. It looked at me, almost like it was offended, and then just glided backwards to the bushes again, and disappeared. When I say disappeared, I don't mean he jumped into the bushes and we lost sight of him. I mean, it actually disappeared, as in vanished into thin air. I watched this thing fade away. When it vanished, it felt like this weight was lifted, and I could breathe and move again. "We gotta get out of here," I heard Ryan say to me, and it was like I snapped right out of it. I threw caution to the wind, and we blew past where that little monster vanished, since it was the only way back down the bluff. We jammed back to the car and drove home, but didn't talk about what we saw. In fact, we didn't talk at all until we were at my house and Ryan told me to get inside. I told him to be safe and to let me know when he got home. I offered to even let him stay there, but he told me he just needed to get home. I think he was just as freaked out as I was, and I don't blame him. It was a full week later before we mentioned it, and we've since talked about it at length. We still have no idea what we saw. Was it a goblin? An elf? Some other type of creature that I've never even heard of? What I want to know is why it had such power over us. Where did that thing come from? Does it live out there? Because we've never been to the bluffs ever since we saw that creature, which sucks because we really liked going out there. Were there more of those things? Were we just at the wrong place at the wrong time? I have so many questions that might never get answered. But I do have one theory, that this thing, whatever the hell it was attracted to my negativity. I think whatever it is feeds off of that kind of energy. I don't know what I saw, but hopefully, once you post this, someone will give me some kind of clue and answers as to what it was we encountered a couple of years ago. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Rachel.